Hello viewers, welcome to my orchid world. Today we are going to discuss about fertilizing hybrid orchids. I have a collection of both species and hybrid orchids. For my species orchids, I do not use any fertilizer. I have mentioned it before in my previous videos. For my hybrid orchids, I use fertilizer for growth period and also for the blooming season for the orchids to put out spikes. It is the season for the hybrid dendrobiums to flower. They are going to put out spikes now. So today I will be talking about the fertilizer that I use, how I use them, how frequently I use them, and what benefits or usefulness is there in this the fertilizer that I use. The fertilizer that I use has a brand name. I will take the brand name, but it is not any kind of ad. So let's start. The orchid fertilizer that I use is Orchid Boon. This is the brand name. They have two different fertilizers for orchids, one for flowering plants and one for growing plants. For the growing one, the NPK ratio is more of nitrogen is more than the potassium and phosphorus, while for the flowering ones, nitrogen is less as compared to phosphorus and potassium. Both the fertilizers have two different colors, which is very easy for you to identify. The growth one is of red color and the bloom one is somewhat yellowish in color, so it is very easily distinguishable. You can also read it on the container, that it is written on the container also. The amount of micronutrients that is present in both the fertilizers is same. It is written on both the containers. You can read it on the label that is written. You can see the micronutrients that is written. Instructions are also given how to use the fertilizer. They instruct that you should use 2 grams per liter of water, but I always keep the concentration on a weaker side than what is written on the label. So what I do is I take a bucket of water, which is about 5 to 6 liters, and pour 5 grams of any of the fertilizers whenever I make the solution. So it becomes much weaker than what is recommended. So it is always better to keep the fertilizer solution on the weaker side, because it prevents reduces the risk of root burn from over fertilization. Before talking about the process of fertilization, I would recommend that you avoid fertilizing on a rainy day, because even if you use a fertilizer solution on the pots on your orchids, it will anyway be washed away by the rain. So avoid fertilizing on a rainy day. I have different setups of potting for my orchids. Some are bare rooted, some are potted in media, some are potted in media and sitting on a humidity tray, some are mounted. So I use different process for all of them, though I use the same solution for fertilizer. For my bare rooted orchids like the vandas, I take the solution in a container, in a big container, where I can soak multiple orchids at the same time. I soak multiple orchids because I know that my orchids are healthy. They do not have any pest, no infection. So I soak them for about 15 to 20 minutes in the fertilizer solution. By this time, the roots soak up the fertilizer and they are good to go. For pots potted with orchids which are very heavy, I use individual pots where I pour the fertilizer solution and just make the pot sit in the pot, so that the orchid roots can soak up the fertilizer solution. I use individual pots for this kind of orchids which are heavy and which cannot stand on a very wide container. They just fall off. So this is a setup for my orchids that are heavy. Some of my orchids are potted in coarse media like bark and sphagnum moss, and they need high humidity, so they are sitting on humidity trays. So for those kind of orchids, I poured the solution of fertilizer directly into the media, which gets collected in the tray below of the humidity tray, and the orchid sits in the fertilizer solution on the humidity tray for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I use the fertilizer for my other flowering plants like roses and hibiscus. Some of my orchids are potted, but they are not sitting on humidity trays. For those orchids, I poured the solution with a sprayer directly into the media, and since the media is a combination of bark and sphagnum moss, so sphagnum moss holds the fertilizer solution for some time so that the orchid can easily soak up the fertilizer required nutrients from the media itself. I use the growth booster once a month during the entire growth period, that is the summer season, and when temperature starts to cool down, I start using the bloom booster. I give a gap of 20 days for the bloom booster and again use it. So it takes about 3 applications for the bloom booster and the spikes start appearing. The orchids are very much benefited from the use of the orchid Boon fertilizers, both the growth and the bloom boosters. It has given me visible results in terms of growth of the orchid as well as the blooms in my hybrid orchids. So I hope you like the video. Please do leave your comments about the fertilizing process and the fertilizer that I use. Some of you might be using this fertilizer. Please let me know how it has been performing in case of your orchids, and if you have liked the video, please hit the like button. Please do subscribe to my channel and keep watching my orchid world. Thank you.